You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In episode 3 of The Garden Below, Symmetry, we go deeper into the mind of the killer as he reveals his true masterpiece. A perfectly symmetrical garden of graves mapped across multiple states, each body planted with chilling precision. Through his haunting monologue, we uncover how each kill is part of a greater floral pattern, an underground bloom shaped in blood, bone, and sacred geometry. But as the final petal falls into place, a forgotten name resurfaces, and we learn the center of this dark design was never empty. It was waiting for her. If you're drawn to psychological horror with slow-burn suspense and chilling confessions, subscribe now to Soul Studios Presents The Garden Below, because even the most beautiful patterns can be made of death. I remember the exact moment when the shape finally revealed itself to me. It was just past midnight, and I stood ankle-deep in a pit of damp earth, my fingers curled tight around the wooden handle of a spade. The night air was cold against my sweat-soaked skin, but I hardly noticed. I was lost in the geometry of the moment. Above me, the moon hung directly overhead, perfectly centered, as if it too were part of my design. Beneath the pale glow of that moon, I finished patting down the last mound of soil. Another grave, another flower planted in my underground garden. The silhouette of a lone oak tree marked this spot, and I had chosen it deliberately. If someone were to see me now, they'd think it just another lonely burial under an old tree. But I knew the truth. This was not an isolated grave at all. It was a single point on a vast, meticulous canvas, one petal in a blooming design that only I could see. I looked down at the fresh soil and let out a slow breath. Underneath lay what remained of a man whose name I never learned. I hadn't needed his name, only his location. He had been just another traveller at a highway rest stop, someone who thought nothing of accepting help from a soft-spoken stranger offering a ride. I recall how he had smiled, grateful, moments before I made him part of something greater. The realization that flashed in his eyes when my hands closed around his throat lasted only a few seconds. Now his body lay precisely where it needed to be, exactly at the coordinates I'd mapped out. This was not murder for murder's sake. This was careful cultivation. Every death in my hands had a purpose, a place. With the earth smoothed over, I stepped back and pulled a folded map from my coat pocket. Even in the dark, I knew every line and marking on it by heart. Kneeling, I spread it open on the ground and traced a gloved finger across the inked dots I had drawn. There were others, several just like the mound at my feet, scattered across this map. At first glance, the dots might seem random, but I had plotted them with obsessive precision. They formed a pattern, a circle of petals radiating from a central point. Symmetry. That was my obsession, my religion. In that moment, under the silent oak, I allowed myself a rare smile. The design was nearing completion. I still remember when the idea first took root in my mind. The first burial had been impulsive, born out of necessity and rage, but even then, as I heaved soil over that shallow pit, I felt the faint tug of a grander scheme. It was a young woman, my first offering to the earth, laid to rest in a forgotten meadow. I hadn't yet drawn a map or measured a single mile, but something about that moment felt significant, like planting a seed. Weeks later, the second one came, a drifter I buried behind a derelict barn 200 miles due south of the meadow. 2 graves, 2 points on a plain. Most would see no connection. But when I marked those 2 sites on a map, I realized I had unconsciously placed them in near-perfect alignment, one directly below the other. It was as if some unseen hand had guided me to create balance. That night, by flickering candlelight, I drew a line between those 2 dots, and in my mind's eye I saw the outline of something beautiful yet terrifying emerge. In that revelation, I found a twisted kind of clarity. My violence could serve a design. I could impose order and meaning on the chaos of death. From that moment I devoted myself to the design. My small apartment became a war room of maps and compasses, dotted with red ink and tangled with yarn. My walls were plastered with maps, topographic charts, state highway sheets, each one stabbed with pushpins and laced with threads connecting site to site. From afar it might have looked like the deranged web of a madman. To me it was the blueprint of a masterpiece. I measured distances with the precision of an engineer and consulted charts of latitude and longitude as if praying over scripture. The two initial graves became my north-south axis, my anchor points. With them set, I calculated where the others must go. I envisioned a great symmetrical bloom spanning state lines, an underground garden of graves mapped like the petals of a flower. Each petal would be a life taken and interred at a precise coordinate. The distances between each grave would be identical, the angles separating them perfectly even, an immaculate symmetry born from blood and soil. Realizing such a plan meant I had to travel far beyond the comfort of any one town. Over the next year, I became a nomad with a dark purpose. I crisscrossed through quiet back roads and endless highways across multiple states, my trunk often carrying a shovel, a roll of plastic, and sometimes a freshly stilled body. Each trip was a pilgrimage to a particular patch of ground I'd chosen months before. There were times I drove all night, fueled by coffee and the adrenaline of anticipation, rehearsing each step in my mind. By daybreak, I might sit in a greasy spoon diner off some nameless highway, sipping coffee under buzzing fluorescent lights with mud, or sometimes blood, still caked under my fingernails. I had become a spectre slipping through the world of ordinary people, hiding in plain sight behind a polite smile and weary eyes. Other times I spent days in a target area, scouting the exact spot, perhaps a clearing in a pine forest in the west, or a marshy field on the eastern shore of a lake. No matter the landscape, be it desert brush, dense woodland, or wind-swept plain, I would find the exact coordinates where the next petal belonged. And there, under cover of darkness and solitude, I would dig. Digging a grave by starlight became a sacred ritual for me. I moved with methodical calm, even when the soil was stubborn with roots or stones. My muscles ached and my hands blistered under the shovel's handle, but I welcomed the pain. It meant I was carving meaning into the world. In the stillness of night, the only sounds were my laboured breathing, the scrape of metal against earth, and occasionally the distant hoot of an owl or the skitter of something alive in the brush. I often found myself humming old lullabies to fill the silence, soft, absent tunes that my mother once sang in our garden at home. That memory would almost make me smile, imagining her tending roses while I tended to my own grisly planting. When the hole was deep enough, I would descend into it, dragging the lifeless form behind me. There was a strange intimacy in those moments. I would whisper an apology or a benediction, I was never sure which, as I arranged each body in its earthen bed. Then came the covering, shovelful by shovelful, until the flesh and the horror of what I had done were hidden away, replaced by a modest mound of dirt that looked not unlike a newly planted seedbed. There were close calls, of course. One night, while I was finishing up a grave near an abandoned rest area, I caught the distant glint of headlights through the trees. A park ranger's truck was patrolling, its engine noise growing louder. My blood turned to ice as I killed my flashlight and pressed myself flat in the shallow pit beside my victim. I lay there in the darkness, the scent of fresh earth filling my nostrils as the vehicle's beams swept over the half-filled hole. For a terrifying moment, light cascaded over me, and I was sure he would see the outline of my body in the dirt. But the beams passed on, and the truck rumbled away into the night. I didn't move for a long time after it left. I simply listened to my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. When I finally climbed out and finished my work, my hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with exhilaration. It felt as though the universe itself wanted this garden to thrive, intervening to keep me safe until the design was complete. All the while, I remained confident that I alone could see the emerging design. On the rare occasions when one of my graves was uncovered by chance, a hunter stumbling on bones in the woods, a construction crew digging up what they thought was old trash, Each discovery was treated as an isolated incident. No one in those small towns suspected a pattern, and neither did the local police. I paid close attention to every news report, my ego stoked by how ordinary they assumed these extraordinary graves were. I was certain that only I could see the grand plan. But far away, in a fluorescent-lit office in Quantico, someone else had begun to connect the dots. There was an FBI intelligence analyst, a young agent named Rebecca Hart, who had a knack for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. She had noticed something unusual in a recent string of cases. Scattered across 3 states, local authorities had discovered a few clandestine burial sites. One had been stumbled upon by a hunter deep in the woods. Another was uncovered when a flood washed out a hidden grave by the river. Yet another set of disturbed earth had been found by a farmer's dog. Different jurisdictions, different victims, nothing to suggest a single killer. But Agent Hart wasn't convinced it was coincidence. Late one night, hunched over a desk piled with missing persons reports and satellite images of Earth disturbances, she spotted the faint outline of a shape. Agent Hart drew circles and lines connecting the sites on her map. Her heart quickened as the points aligned into something unmistakable, a rough flower-like pattern, symmetrical across its center. Every known grave was equidistant from a central spot, an empty patch of ground that she guessed might hide yet another victim not yet found. It was a bold theory, a single killer orchestrating murders to create a gigantic geometric design. To anyone else, it sounded absurd. And when she hurriedly presented her findings to the senior agents the next morning, pointing at her map of dotted petals, she was met with skeptical frowns and folded arms. One supervisor coughed and asked, "So you think we've got some kind of flower murderer drawing pictures with bodies?" Laughter murmured through the room. Another shook his head and muttered about coincidences and overworked imaginations. Agent Hart left that briefing with a burning frustration knotting her stomach. To her, the pattern was as clear as day. Why couldn't they see it? She double-checked the data, the distances between sites, the timing of disappearances, the soil analysis at each scene. Everything fit too perfectly to be random. But her superiors saw only disparate tragedies, not the work of a single meticulous monster. In the dim archive room where she first pieced it together, Hart stayed late, running her fingers over the pushpins on her map that formed my deadly flower. She couldn't let it go. "It's real. I know it's real," she whispered to the empty room. Still officially, the case went nowhere. A formal investigation into a giant flower-shaped murder spree was too far-fetched for the Bureau's liking. And so, my garden remained a ghost story, a dark hypothesis locked away in the back of an analyst's mind. I wouldn't learn about Agent Hart until much later, but the idea that someone out there might have seen the outline of my design sends a shiver of gratification through me. Even as I speak these words, I'm picturing her standing over that map with the realization blooming in her mind. I wonder if she felt a thrill at that moment of discovery. Did her breath catch in her throat the way mine does when a new petal falls perfectly into place? The thought that a stranger, an adversary no less, could appreciate the shape of my work even briefly feels like recognition. Twisted as it sounds, a part of me is glad she saw it. Every artist craves an audience, after all, and I had been creating my masterpiece in the dark. In a way, being noticed, however fleetingly, is just another stage in the blooming of my creation. A flower doesn't bloom in secret, it opens itself to be seen, to lure bees with its pattern and colour. When Agent Hart glimpsed my pattern, it was as if the first bee had found my garden. My petals were beginning to draw attention, exactly as they were meant to. Her dismissal by the others was unfortunate for her, perhaps, but beneficial for me. It bought me time. I knew that eventually, if I continued, the full flower would become too vivid for even the skeptics to ignore. But by then, it would be far too late. By then, my symmetry would be complete and undeniable, and time was something I was prepared to use. In the weeks after Agent Hart's theory was dismissed, I pushed onward, driven by a new sense of urgency layered atop my devotion. I filled in the remaining points of the design one by one. I remember the night I met her. It was late summer at a dingy truck-stop diner off Route 6, and the humidity clung to the air. The place was nearly empty, just me and the waitress cleaning up for the night. She was in her mid-30s, with tired eyes and a polite smile, the kind of woman who'd been on her feet for hours, but still asked how my coffee was. After closing, I found her outside, standing under a flickering neon sign, nervously fumbling for her car keys. Her car had refused to start, and the nearest help was miles away. I offered her a ride. At first she hesitated, a lone stranger in the dead of night, but exhaustion and desperation won out. She thanked me and climbed into my passenger seat, never suspecting that by accepting my kindness she was sealing her fate. We drove onto a quiet county road under a canopy of stars. As the diner's lights faded behind us, she opened up in the way strangers sometimes do on long drives. She told me about her life, about the young daughter waiting for her at home, about the bills she could barely pay. I nodded and offered a few gentle words, encouraging her to keep talking. Her voice was warm, filled with hope that the next turn in life might be kinder. For a moment, listening to her, I could almost pretend I was just giving a good person a harmless lift home. Then I missed the turn for her town. The headlights carved a path into a dense patch of woods, and she tensed. This isn't the right way," she murmured, confusion creeping into her voice. I saw her hand hover near the door handle. I eased the car to a crawl. In the dark, her face was lit only by the dull glow of the dashboard. I can still picture the realization dawning in her eyes as the truth hit. She didn't even have time to scream. I lunged, slamming my forearm across her throat from behind. The car swerved as we struggled. She clawed at my arm, gasping, choking out a single word between strangled breaths, "Please." In those moments, she wasn't a mere point on my map or a petal in my garden. She was a terrified mother begging to see her child again, and for the briefest sliver of time, my resolve wavered. A vision of her little girl, asleep in a tiny bed waiting for Mommy to come home, flickered in my mind. I felt a pang of something almost like regret. Almost. But purpose is a powerful thing. I grit my teeth and tightened my grip until I felt the fight ebb from her body. Her desperate kicks slowed, then ceased. Silence. In the aftermath, I sat in the car for a long minute, catching my breath, the weight of what I'd done settling over me. My arms were trembling, not from remorse, I told myself, but from the adrenaline. I reminded myself that this was necessary. She was necessary. A sacrifice to a vision greater than either of us. Under a moonless sky, I carried her lifeless body into the woods. The night was deathly quiet, broken only by the crunch of dry leaves under my boots. I chose a spot beneath a stand of old oak trees where the ground was soft enough to dig. With my pocket knife, I cut away a lock of her hair, an old habit, a personal keepsake of sorts, and tucked it into my coat. Then I retrieved my shovel from the trunk and began to dig by the glow of my headlights. The earth was loose here. The grave came together faster than usual. When it was deep enough, I laid her gently into the earth. She looked eerily peaceful in the shallow grave, as if sleeping. I found myself whispering an apology into the stillness. Some part of me felt she deserved that much. Then I covered her over with soil and concealed the mound under a thick blanket of fallen leaves. By the time I was done, it was as if she had never been there at all. She was now a part of the forest floor, a silent ingredient in the pattern only I understood. She became my eastern petal. A few weeks later, I picked up a hitchhiker on a lonely highway late at night. He was young, maybe 20, and so grateful for the ride that he never saw the blade in my hand until it was too late. By dawn, I had buried his body at the foot of a rocky ridge under the pale light of the fading stars. He became the western petal in my blooming design. By early autumn, I had taken 2 more lives to complete the ring. I lured a university student away from her campus to mark the northeastern point, leaving her remains in a lonely, wind-swept field. On the drive to that field, the glare of red and blue lights suddenly filled my rearview mirror. My heart pounded as I eased the car to the shoulder, the dead girl wrapped in a tarp just a few feet behind me in the trunk. A young state trooper approached and tipped his hat, only intending to warn me about a broken tail light. I forced a calm smile and spun a lie about heading home from a late-night library study session. In that moment, my gloved hand hovered near the gun beneath my seat. I was prepared to do the unthinkable if he demanded to search the car, but he never did. After a cursory look at my license and a friendly drive-safe nod, he sent me on my way. I exhaled shakily as the patrol car disappeared into the night. Once again, chance, or something more, had intervened to protect my work. Then, not long after, I led an aging drifter to his end on the southwestern edge of the bloom. He died with a bewildered look in his eyes under the crimson twilight sky. Neither of them ever knew why it was happening to them, but I did. Young or old, man or woman, it made no difference. Only the pattern mattered. Each burial brought the pattern closer to its full shape. With every new point on the map, I felt the symmetry locking into place, as if the world itself were aligning to my vision. Finally, the night came when the last of the planned petals was in place. I stood alone on a hillside shortly after burying that final body, feeling the magnitude of what I had accomplished. There were now 6 graves hidden across hundreds of miles, each one precisely where it was meant to be. In my mind, I could see the completed shape clearly, a 6-pointed blossom of death with a silent, untouched center. I closed my eyes and almost sensed the earth humming with the balance of it all. My chest swelled with a dark pride. I had done it. I had taken the chaos of taking lives and forged from it a pattern, a meaning. In a world that often felt senseless to me, I had created order, terrible, beautiful order, out of blood and sorrow. In my mind, none of them had died in vain. I had given their ends a purpose. Buried in this design, they would become part of something that outlived them, a dark testament to meaning wrested from meaninglessness. And yet, as I gazed into the darkness of that triumphant moment, I felt a strange hollowness bloom in me. The design was complete in form, but its heart, the center, remained empty. In the perfection of my pattern, something essential was missing, like a flower without a seed. My thoughts wandered, unbidden, to a name I had kept buried deeper than any body: Lena. For years I had tried to bury every thought of her, deeper and darker than any grave I dug, but her memory always clawed its way back to the surface. She was the only person who ever looked at me and saw something other than a monster. The memory of her face flickered in my mind, sad, hopeful, human. In the stillness, I whispered her name, and it lingered in the cold air like a ghost. She was the one part of my life that hadn't fit into my symmetry, the one beautiful thing I could never weave into this dark design. Until now. I slung my shovel over my shoulder and left that hillside, the outline of my masterpiece safely concealed in the dark. The night was deathly quiet, but inside my mind, memories of Lena stirred like the faint rustle of leaves. I knew then that my journey was far from over. There was one story left to tell, one more hole to dig, one final bloom to complete the symmetry, and it all led back to her. Lena once saw a goodness in me that I had long since buried. With her, I had briefly glimpsed a life beyond violence, a life of fragile, ordinary beauty. If I had held on to her, perhaps none of this would have been necessary, or perhaps my dark fate was always sealed. Now the final turn of this path is approaching, and I cannot avoid it. If I am to finish this garden and make sense of the man I've become, I must finally confront Lena, the only one who ever saw me as human. Every grave I've dug, every mile I've travelled, has brought the pattern into focus, petal by petal, death by design. But even in perfect symmetry, there's always a centre, a single point where everything begins and where everything must return. And for me, that centre has always been her. Some flowers bloom in sunlight. Mine was born in shadow, and its heart is named Lena.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.